They hate America attorneys general in blue states. They hate America press. Well, they want you to believe that birthright citizenship is right there in the Constitution. I've even heard some of our friends on cable and on radio say it's in the Constitution. It's going to be tough to turn this around. It's not in the Constitution. It's not anywhere in the Constitution. It's not in the history of the 14th Amendment. In fact, quite the contrary. The author of the 1866 Civil Rights Act, the first of the Civil Rights Acts in American history and after the Civil War, had a lot of influence on the makeup of the 14th Amendment and specifically said it had nothing to do with aliens. We have a Supreme Court decision at the end of the 18th century, which I'll get into as well. Stick with me. Our problem is going to be activist judges and justices. Unfortunately, now most judges and justices are activists, even the ones, in many instances, who claim to be originalists, to be reading the text of the Constitution. Or they fall back to the position that the country's gotten used to this and we don't want to create a radicalization of any policy position and so forth and so on. Why don't you just read the Constitution and, damn it, just follow it? You're a judge. And so this is already prepared to attack. They want to get a temporary restraining order on President Trump's executive order. Our friend Alan Dershowitz has said an executive order cannot reverse a constitutional amendment. Of course, it's not in the Constitution, so an executive order should be effective enough to end it. But I tell you again, this won't be about what the Constitution actually says. There will be an activist effort. I hope it fails, but it may well succeed, to try and pretend that the Supreme Court has created precedent and try and pretend it's always been there and then say we're not going to reverse course. It would be so inhumane rather. There's nothing in the Constitution about birthright citizenship. The idea that if you're just born in the United States, you're a citizen is a sham, and it's always been a sham. Democrats and the media claim it comes from the 14th Amendment, and they're lying. I've talked about that here on Fox, on Blaze, how even on Meet the Depressed, the phony moderator, another left-wing Democrat dressed up as a journalist in a $12 dress, she only read part of the language in the 14th Amendment to mislead everybody who was watching Meet the Depressed, which is why I tell you, why watch Meet the Depressed? What was the purpose of the 14th Amendment? Well, what were the purposes of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? And why do we call them the post-Civil War amendments? They were specifically aimed at the just freed black slaves, no longer slaves. They were amendments passed to ensure the rights and privileges that every American enjoys would now be enshrined in our Constitution to protect and promote citizenship for black people, because we still had states that were resisting. And I must remind you that 3/4 of the House and Senate, 3/4 of the states are necessary to ratify a constitutional amendment, and that's what they did. And if some of these southern states or Confederate states hadn't voted for it, they were not going to be allowed back into the Union. The 1866 Civil Rights Act came before the 14th Amendment, and the 1866 Civil Rights Act was the precursor to the 14th Amendment, conveying equal rights, the right to vote, and so forth and so on the newly freed black individuals who had been black slaves. The problem was, after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson was president. He was a Democrat. He actually supported the Civil War, but he was not big on conferring equal rights on black people. And so Congress, which was, made up of a significant majority in the House and Senate of Republicans who had supported abolition and so forth, they passed the 1866 Civil Rights Act. Johnson resisted it. He wasn't going to enforce it. And they passed it over his objections. Thus, the people who were behind the Civil Rights Act of 1866, they decided we need to amend the Constitution. In addition to the 13th and 15th Amendments that they had already been developing, thus came the 14th Amendment, applying due process and equal protection to black people that already existed in the 5th Amendment of the Constitution, but applying it to the states through the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, the relevant clause that we're talking about here, was intended to ensure that black people were emancipated in every respect as citizens of the United States. It had nothing to do with immigration, legal or illegal. It never came up. In fact, that's not correct. The one time it came up, it was dismissed as irrelevant. That's the legislative history. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, that's what we're talking about. Congress shall have power to establish uniform rules of naturalization, okay? Congress has never passed a federal statute that confers birthright citizenship. Never. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in federal law. It's not in the legislative history. And yet here it is. Why? Because Democrats, some Republicans, the bureaucracy, they see birthright citizenship as a means to an end. Birthright citizenship is the argument, is the position, is the policy the Democrat Party holds on to because they want monopoly power for all time. They don't care if it's foreigners or not. They don't care if it's foreigners or not. And that's why you have these state attorneys general bringing the cases that they're bringing to try and stop it. They're going to form shop, try and get a district court that'll help them. District court, they're looking for a temporary restraining order nationwide from one federal judge. These federal district judges, I think there's 1,000 or 1,100 of them. They just need one. Then you go through the appellate process and so forth. And so that's what they're going to be doing the entire time. This is going to be a tough one because of the mindset of the judiciary and the fact that so many people are affected by this. I mean, what the court could do, if it wants to be practical as opposed to constitutional, is say from this point forward there is no birthright citizenship, that it has been conveyed and conferred on individuals who are already here and they've relied on it. That would be better than nothing. As they say, half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. Right? So, what does the relevant section of your Constitution, the 14th Amendment, say about citizenship? Quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. So what is this phrase, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof? It sounds like our courts, our Congress, the media, the ethnic front groups, all pretend it doesn't exist, or they try and interpret it in a way that makes it useless. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. That's not what it says. It says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, when this was originally ratified, they excluded American Indians. That is, individuals who lived in this country, Native Americans, who they didn't consider, quote-unquote, citizens of America because they were citizens of a tribe. That's how they interpreted jurisdiction thereof. Can you imagine people coming into this country, as an example, illegally having children? That their amendment would be so spun, so twisted to apply to that? It doesn't apply to that. It was intended to effectively reverse the Dred Scott decision of 1857. That basically held that slaves or black Americans from African descent would never be eligible for U.S. citizenship because they're black. This amendment was aimed at fixing that once and for all. But it was never intended to be a blank a blank board for anybody who comes into the country, happens to have a kid or purposely has a kid, and all of a sudden, oh, you're in the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, some of you might think, well, legally they are in the jurisdiction of the United States. It's not what they meant either. Jurisdiction meaning allegiance to the United States. Part of the system of the United States. That's what they meant by jurisdiction. So if you have diplomats who visit the United States and they happen to have children here, nobody claims that they're automatically American citizens. If you're a tourist and you come to the United States, you happen to have a child here, nobody's claiming they're automatically American citizens. So why would we say that if you're an illegal immigrant who comes to the United States and have a child here, that's automatically a birthright citizen? Notice, birthright citizens, that phrase doesn't even exist. Was never uttered. Had nothing to do with this amendment. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The jurisdiction thereof. If you're here illegally and you have a child, you don't get to determine. It's not like I get to unilaterally determine that I'm subject to the jurisdiction of the United States any more than a diplomat does or a tourist does or somebody on a student visa does or anything of the kind. And they have a child. And so there's literally nothing that supports this. Nothing. Zero. Now, so the Trump administration has put together an executive order that reads as follows. By the authority vested in me as president by the constitutional laws of the United States, it is hereby ordered, Section 1, purpose. The privilege of United States citizenship is a priceless and profound gift. 14th Amendment states all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. That provision rightly repudiated the Supreme Court of the United States' shameful decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford in 1857, which misinterpreted the Constitution as permanently, as I said, excluding people of African descent from eligibility for U.S. citizenship solely based on their race. But the 14th Amendment has never been interpreted to extend citizenship universally to everyone born within the United States. It has always excluded from birthright citizenship persons who were born in the United States but not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, quote unquote. So consistent with this understanding, the Congress has further specified through legislation that, quote, a person born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a national, a citizen of the United States at birth, generally mirroring the 14th Amendment's text. Now, among the categories of individuals born in the U.S. and not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, the privilege of the United States citizenship does not automatically extend to persons born in the United States. One, when that person's mother was unlawfully present in the United States and the father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth, that is a child of illegal aliens. Two, when that person's mother's presence in the United States at the time of said person's birth was lawful but temporary, such as, but not limited to, visiting the United States under the auspices of a visa waiver program, this is what I just pointed out, or visiting on a student, work, or tourist visa, and the father was not a United States citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth. The policy, Section 2. It is the policy of the United States that no department or agency of the United States shall issue documents regarding United States citizenship or accept documents issued by state, local, or other governments or authorities purporting to recognize U.S. citizenship to persons when that person's mother was unlawfully present, and they go through the same routine. Mother means the immediate female biological progenitor, they write. Father means the immediate male biological progenitor. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect the authority, and it goes on. So it's a straightforward executive order. Again, our friend Alan Dershowitz, a great guy, smart as hell. When he says you can't reverse an amendment with an executive order, yes, but you can reverse a non-supported practice with an executive order, and that's what we're talking about here. It's not in the Constitution. It never has been. Unless a court or the Supreme Court rewrites the Constitution in the 14th Amendment and includes it in there. And I'm sick and tired of these courts amending our Constitution. We have an amendment process, two of them. They're very difficult, but they exist. And it doesn't include judges or even a group of justices amending the Constitution. There is no birthright citizenship in our governing document of any kind, in our legislative history of any kind, in any statute whatsoever.